The ringtone tore through the silence of my house at 3:02 in the morning. My son was screaming on the other end, begging for $45,000 to save his wife from loan sharks. I was ready to empty my accounts until a second call came from the police at noon. Now, the box waiting on my porch does not hold the cash he expects. It holds the first bullet of my revenge. My name is Eleanor Price. I am a 57-year-old divorced woman living alone in a sprawling, silent house in Silveridge, Colorado. My days are usually consumed by the hum of industrial dryers and the smell of detergent at Everglow Laundry, the chain of laundromats I built from the ground up. I had just managed to drift into a fragile sleep after a grueling shift when the darkness of my bedroom was shattered. The phone rang at 3:02 in the morning. It was not a standard ringtone. It was the specific, jarring melody I had assigned to my son, Michael. My heart slammed against my ribs with a violence that made me gasp. For any mother, a call at this hour never brings good news. It is the sound of accidents, hospitals, or arrests. I sat up, my body reacting with the conditioned reflex of a woman who has spent decades acting as a family emergency service. I fumbled for the device on the nightstand and swiped the screen. Mom. His voice was high-pitched, cracking with what sounded like sheer terror. Mom. Are you there? You have to help me. Michael, what is it? Are you hurt? I asked, gripping the sheets. It's Sabrina, he sobbed, the sound wet and jagged. They have her. Mom, these guys, they are dangerous. I owe them money, a lot of money. They said if I don't pay them $45,000 by noon today, they are going to hurt her. You have to help me. The number hung in the cold air of my bedroom. $45,000. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my feet hitting the freezing hardwood floor. Slow down, I commanded, though my own pulse was racing. Who has her? Where are you? Put Sabrina on the phone right now. I can't. Michael screamed, his voice distorting. She is locked in a back room. They won't let me near her. They took her phone. Mom. Please. They aren't playing games. They have guns. I pressed the phone harder against my ear, straining to hear beyond his frantic breathing. I expected to hear the harsh sounds of a warehouse, shouting, or perhaps the muffled cries of my daughter-in-law. Instead, I heard a low, rhythmic thumping in the background. It sounded like soft jazz, or perhaps the ambient noise of a high-end lounge. Then, for a split second, I heard it a sharp, stifled sound. It sounded like a giggle being smothered by a hand. My blood ran cold, but not from fear. Michael, I said, my voice dropping an octave. Why is there music playing? It's the TV, he stammered, his rhythm breaking. They have the TV on loud to drown out the noise. Don't ask questions about that. Just listen to me. I need the $45,000 transferred to my account by 10 in the morning. If you actually love me, if you care about Sabrina at all, you will do this. This is the only way. The memories assaulted me then. I remembered the $5,000 for his credit card debt when he was 22. The $10,000 for the investment opportunity that vanished into thin air. The $20,000 for the medical emergency that turned out to be a lie about a car accident. Every time, he had sounded just like this. Desperate. Broken. And every time, I had opened my wallet to fix it. This is the last time, he pleaded, his voice dropping to a whisper. I swear to God. Just save us this one last time. I closed my eyes. A war raged between my ears. One voice screamed that my son was in danger. The other voice, colder and more rational, whispered that the only danger in that room was Michael himself. "Okay," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "I will handle it. I will get the money. Thank you. Oh God, thank you." He wept. The line went dead. I sat there for a moment in the silence of 3:15 in the morning. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, my movements mechanical. The refrigerator hummed in the stillness. I stared at the photograph, magnet tacked to the door. It was Michael, at age 5, missing a front tooth, grinning as he held up a muddy earthworm. That boy had been so full of light. The man on the phone was a stranger who knew exactly which buttons to push to access my bank account. I brewed a pot of strong black coffee and sat down at the dining table. I opened my laptop, the screen's blue light illuminating the dark kitchen. I logged in. I looked at my balances. I could afford the $45,000. It would hurt, but I could do it. I hovered the mouse cursor over the banking tab. Then I stopped. For the first time in my life, I did not click on the bank's website. Instead, I navigated to a hidden folder deep within my hard drive that I had created 6 months ago, after the last bailout. The folder was named simply Michael. If it happens again. I double-clicked it. It was empty of money, but full of something far more valuable. I took a sip of the bitter coffee and stared at the screen. The trembling in my hands stopped. I was not a mother panicking anymore. I was a woman who had just realized she was being held hostage in her own home. And I was done negotiating. 15 years ago. I stood in the wreckage of my marriage with nothing but a defiant chin and a teenage son who needed sneakers. I built Everglow Laundry from a single, damp storefront into a citywide chain servicing hospitals and high-end apartments. I scrubbed floors until my knees bled so Michael would never have to know the shame of an empty fridge. I told myself that every quarter I earned was a brick in the foundation of his future. At first, the requests were innocent. They were the kind of things a mother is proud to provide. Tuition for his freshman year, a deposit for a safe apartment, a used sedan so he could drive to his classes. I handed over the checks with a swelling chest, telling myself, my son does not need to beg strangers for loans. He has me. But the definition of help began to warp. Michael dropped out in his sophomore year. He told me college was a scam and that he wanted to launch a startup with his friends. I should have said no. Instead, I withdrew $20,000 from my retirement fund to save him when that venture inevitably crashed 6 months later. I told myself it was just a stumble. Everyone stumbles. Then came Sabrina. When Michael introduced her, I felt a desperate flare of hope. She was a nurse, soft-spoken and hard-working, with hands that looked like they knew the value of labor. I thought she was the anchor he needed. So when Michael asked for money to pay off credit cards to clear their credit for a mortgage, I paid it. When their car needed a transmission, I paid it. I told myself I was investing in their happiness, in my future grandchildren. But the red flags were not just flags anymore. They were sirens. I started noticing the erratic hours, the nervous ticks, the way Michael checked his phone constantly. He had found online gambling and sports betting. My phone began to ring with a terrifying frequency, always with a new catastrophe. Just this once, I swear. Mom. He would plead. It is a medical bill. Or, it is a tax error. I started a secret spreadsheet. I did not create it to demand repayment, but because I needed to see the truth in black and white. I logged every transfer, every cash withdrawal, every bill paid directly. When I ran the sum last Christmas, the total hovered near $200,000. The breaking point was not the money, though it was the betrayal. 2 years ago, during Thanksgiving, I walked into the kitchen to get more wine and heard Michael talking to a friend on the back porch. The window was cracked open. Mum never says no. He was laughing, a sound that curdled my blood. She feels guilty about leaving Dad. It is her trigger button. I just have to mention how hard it was growing up without a father, and she opens her wallet. It is too easy. I stood frozen in my own kitchen, holding a bottle of Merlot, feeling my heart turn into stone. He was not struggling. He was harvesting my guilt. That was the day I made an appointment with Linda Carver. Linda has been a lawyer in Silveridge for 30 years, and she has eyes that can cut glass. I sat in her office, weeping with humiliation, asking about the legal limits of parental obligation. "Eleanor," Linda had said, leaning over her mahogany desk, "you have two choices. You can continue being a crying ATM, or you can prepare a long-term plan to sever the limb before the gangrene kills you." I hesitated then. I was not ready to cut him off. It felt unnatural, like severing my own arm. But then came the loan. Michael had forged my signature to co-sign a massive business loan. When he defaulted, the bank came for my flagship laundromat on 4th Street. I barely saved the business, draining my emergency reserves to fix his mess. That night, I did not cry. I went home and created the folder on my laptop. If it happens again, I scanned every contract. I saved every voicemail where he admitted to gambling. I recorded every call where he emotionally blackmailed me. I built an arsenal of evidence, praying I would never have to use it. But as I sat in the dark kitchen, sipping my cold coffee, I realized the prayer had gone unanswered. The file was no longer just insurance. It was ammunition, and I was finally ready to pull the trigger. The sun had just begun to bleed a pale, sickly grey through my kitchen curtains when I dialed Michael's number. I kept my voice steady, masking the tremor in my hands with the authority of a business owner negotiating a contract. I told him to come to the house before 9 o'clock. I lied and told him I needed to discuss how to transfer such a large sum without triggering bank alerts that might upset his so-called creditors. He arrived at 8:45. When I opened the door, the morning air was crisp, but Michael was sweating. He paced the entryway, his eyes darting around the front lawn as if expecting a sniper in the hydrangeas. Sabrina was with him. She did not look like a woman who had just been released from a hostage situation. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were rimmed with red, swollen from crying. But there were no bruises. There were no zip-tie marks on her wrists. She just looked like a ghost haunting her own body. We sat in the living room. Michael refused coffee. He launched immediately into a story about a loan shark ring operating out of North Crest. "They are animals." "Mom," Michael said, wringing his hands. "You don't know what they do. They smashed the windshield of the Ford last week. They said next time. Next time they would take Sabrina and not give her back until I paid. That is why they held her last night." I leaned back in my armchair, watching him. "North Crest," I repeated. "Which street? What do they look like? Give me a name." "Michael. If I am paying $45,000, I want to know who is cashing the check. Names don't matter," he snapped, sweat beading on his upper lip. "Why are you interrogating me? Do you want them to kill us?" "It was a warehouse near the old textile factory. That is all I know." He was lying. I knew it instantly. The old textile factory in Northcrest had been demolished 3 years ago to build condos. I looked at Sabrina. She was staring at her lap, picking at a loose thread on her jeans. "I am so sorry, Eleanor," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Everything is my fault. I shouldn't have let it get this bad." "What is your fault?" "Sabrina?" I asked sharply. "Did you borrow the money?" "She didn't do anything," Michael interrupted, his voice booming in the quiet room. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his fingers digging in slightly. "She is just traumatized. Don't twist her words. Mom." I softened my expression, feigning the maternal concern he expected. "I just want to understand," I said gently. "I remember when you had little Leo. I paid the hospital bills because I wanted you to be safe. I want that same safety for you now." Michael seized on the memory like a drowning man grabbing a rope. "Exactly," he said, his eyes welling up with tears that looked practiced. "You saved us once. Mom, please. Save us again. I can't lose her. I need to use the restroom," Michael said suddenly, standing up. My stomach is in knots. The moment the bathroom door clicked shut down the hall, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Sabrina leaned forward, her eyes wide and terrified. "Eleanor," she hissed, talking fast. "I wasn't locked up. He made me stay at my sister's house, but he says there are bad people. He says if he doesn't pay, someone is going to get hurt. But I don't know if it is true. Don't give him the money. Please. I am scared of him." "Hey," Michael's voice boomed from the hallway, cutting her off before I could ask more. He strode back into the room, zipping his jacket. "What were you talking about?" I looked at Sabrina, who had engaged in a terrified silence. I realized then that she was not a co-conspirator. She was a hostage, just not the kind Michael had described. She was a hostage to his manipulation, his debts, and his volatility. The last drop of pity I felt for my son evaporated. I stood up. "I will get the money. I lied. But I cannot just withdraw $45,000 from an ATM. I have to move funds from my business accounts and visit the main branch. It will take time." Michael looked at his watch, panicked. "We don't have time. Noon. Mom? Noon. Come back here at 11:30. I commanded. Not a minute sooner, or I won't have the cash. And not a minute later, or I will assume you don't want it." Michael lunged forward and wrapped his arms around me. It was a hug that used to make my day, but now it felt like being strangled by a snake. "Thank you," he whispered into my hair. "I promise. Mom, after this, I am done. I will cut all ties with that life. I will be the son you deserve." I patted his back stiffly. I looked over his shoulder at the wall. He was not the 5-year-old boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms anymore. He was a man who had memorized a script to exploit my love. "Go," I said. 11:30. They left. I locked the door behind them and leaned against the wood, listening to the sound of his car engine fading down the street. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my mind was crystal clear. The sadness was gone. I walked to the kitchen and opened the laptop. The folder labeled "If It Happens Again" was open on the screen. It was time. I dialed Linda Carver's number before the sound of Michael's car had even fully faded from the street. I placed the phone on the kitchen counter and switched it to speaker mode so my hands were free. I walked to the wall, safe, hidden behind the pantry shelving, and spun the dial. Eleanor Linda's voice was sharp, professional, and devoid of the usual pleasantries. She answered on the first ring. "It is time," I said, my voice steady. "Execute the contingency plan. He asked for $45,000 this morning." "Understood," Linda replied. I heard the frantic clicking of a keyboard on her end. It was the language of two women who had been sharpening knives in the dark for months. "I am activating the transfer documents now, effective immediately. The title deeds for all 3 Everglow laundry locations are moving into the irrevocable trust for your grandson. Leo, the clause is specific. Michael cannot touch a single cent of the principal or the profits as long as he carries any unsecured debt. He is locked out. Eleanor." "Good," I said. I pulled a stack of heavy files from the safe. "I am calling the bank next." "Do it," Linda urged. "I will have the courier pick up the hard copies of the trust for your signature at the airport hotel. Be safe, Eleanor." I hung up and immediately dialed the priority line for my bank. It took 10 minutes of aggressive authorization, but by the end of the call, I had scorched the earth. I froze every joint credit limit. I revoked the power of attorney I had foolishly granted him 5 years ago to help me pay bills during a bout of pneumonia. I changed every password, every PIN, and every security question. Then, I turned to the printer. It whirred to life, spitting out the spreadsheet I had agonized over for a decade. It was a long, damning scroll of paper. I watched the numbers slide out. Rent assistance, car repairs, legal fees for a brawl he started in a bar. The total at the bottom was bold and undeniable, $320,000. Next to every single date and dollar amount, I had typed the excuse he gave. And the phrase he always used, "This is the last time." I found a cardboard box in the garage, a simple brown thing usually used for moving books. I began to pack it with the precision of a coroner assembling evidence. First, the spreadsheet went in, creating a foundation of guilt. Second, I added the photocopies of every promissory note he had scribbled on napkins or typed up in emails, promising to pay me back with interest. Third, I placed the thick document Linda had drafted. It was a formal legal declaration stating that I, Eleanor Price, had severed all financial ties with Michael Price, and that any future debts he incurred were his sole legal responsibility. On top of the papers, I tossed in a small, silver USB drive. It contained years of saved voicemails. It held the recordings of him screaming at me when I refused to buy him a new truck. It held the recording of him bragging to a friend about manipulating me. And, most importantly, it held the recording of the call from 3 o'clock this morning, proving his extortion attempt. I took a red marker and a blank sheet of paper. My hand did not shake. I wrote in large, block letters, "Betrayal, consequences, justice, starts here." I placed the note on the very top, ensuring it would be the first thing he saw. I taped the box shut and wrote Michael on the lid. I picked up the phone one last time and called my neighbor, Harold. Eleanor Harold wheezed slightly. "Everything all right, Harold? I need a favor," I said. "I am going out of town for a few days. Around noon. Someone is going to come to my porch to pick up a package. I need you to keep an eye on the house from your window." "Of course," Harold said. "Is it Michael?" "It might be," I said evasively. "Just watch. If there is yelling, or if he tries to break a window, call the police immediately. Do not come over. Just call them." "Okay." "I will watch," Harold sounded worried, but he agreed. I carried the box to the front porch and set it directly on the welcome mat. I checked the angle of the doorbell camera. It was blinking a steady blue, recording everything in high definition. I went back inside. I pulled the curtains tight. I turned off every single light, plunging the house into a gloom that suggested abandonment. I grabbed the small suitcase I had packed 2 days ago. It contained 3 changes of clothes, my passport, and $5,000 in cash. I walked out the back door, locking the deadbolt behind me. I climbed into my old, rusted pickup truck, which was parked in the alleyway rather than the driveway. I started the engine. As I drove away from the home I had spent 30 years building, I did not look back in the rearview mirror. I headed toward the highway on-ramp, aiming for the airport in the neighboring city. I was leaving the scene of the crime before the victim even knew he was dead. The tires of my pickup truck hummed against the asphalt of the highway as I put distance between myself and the house on Elm Street. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles had turned white. I was halfway to the airport when the silence of the cab was broken by the buzzing of my cell phone on the dashboard. It was a local number, but not one stored in my contacts. I hesitated, thinking it might be Michael calling from a different phone to scream at me for leaving early. But I answered it anyway. "This is Eleanor Price," I said, my voice sounding more steady than I felt. "Mrs. Price. My name is Detective Aaron Miles from the Financial Crimes Division of the Silver Ridge Police Department." A deep, calm voice replied. "I am calling because we have an active file open regarding your son, Michael Price." My stomach dropped. "Is he hurt?" I asked instinctively, the mother in me overriding the strategist. "He told me there were men, loan sharks. Did they find him, Noah?" "Mrs. Price. He is not hurt," Detective Miles said, his tone sharpening slightly. "We have been monitoring a fraud ring involving illegal personal loans and underground gambling in the area. Your son's name has appeared in our files multiple times, not just as a participant, but as a person of interest in several fraud reports." "I don't understand." I stammered. "He said his wife was being held. He said they would hurt her. That is actually why I am calling you." The detective interrupted. "Sabrina called 911 late last night. She is not being held hostage, Mrs. Price. She told officers she had left the marital home yesterday afternoon and was staying at a secure location with your grandson. She called because she was terrified Michael would use her name and safety as a lever to extort money from family members. She wanted to be on the record that she is safe." The road ahead blurred for a second. The image of Sabrina sitting on my sofa less than 2 hours ago, looking terrified and whispered warnings, flashed in my mind. Michael had dragged her there. He had forced her to play a role in his theatre of misery, even after she had tried to escape him. "We have a financial history here," Detective Miles continued, his voice relentless and factual. "Michael has solicited funds from 3 other individuals in the last 6 months using a nearly identical script involving kidnappings or imminent physical threats. The amounts ranged from $5,000 to $30,000. The total documented loss is over $100,000 in 6 months. I felt bile rise in my throat. I was not special. I was just the biggest fish in the pond he was fishing in. "I need you to be honest with me, Mrs. Price," the detective said. "Did he call you early this morning? Did he mention a specific figure, perhaps around $45,000, and a group of very dangerous people?" The specificity of the number made me close my eyes. It was a script, It was a cold, calculated script that he had likely rehearsed while I was sleeping. For 40 years, I had covered for him. I had hidden his broken toys, his bad grades, his failed businesses, and his broken promises. I had been his shield. But as the mile markers flew past me, I realized a shield protects, but it also hides the truth. Yes, I said, my voice cracking before hardening into steel. He called at 3 o'clock this morning. He demanded $45,000 by noon. He said they would kill Sabrina. Okay, Miles said, and I could hear him typing. Mrs. Price, listen to me carefully. Do not transfer that money. You are currently a target of an extortion scheme. I didn't. I said, I left a box on the porch. It has records. It has a USB drive with recordings of his calls, including the one from this morning. I have a camera pointing right at it. There was a pause on the line. You recorded him. For years, I admitted. I have a spreadsheet of every dollar. I have his voice threatening me. I thought I was just teaching him a lesson. I didn't know I was building a criminal case. Mrs. Price, that box is evidence, Miles said, his tone shifting from warning to urgent cooperation. If you have documented proof of his extortion attempts, you can help us break this entire ring. Michael isn't just a victim of these sharks. He is recruiting for them to pay off his own debts. I need your permission to access your security feed and to seize that box when he arrives. You have it. I said, you have all of it. Keep driving, he instructed. Stay away from the city. Let us handle what happens at noon. I ended the call. I pulled into the long-term parking lot at the airport and turned off the engine. The silence rushed back in, but it was different now. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, looking at the planes taking off in the distance. My heart was breaking for the little boy who used to catch earthworms, but my soul felt lighter than it had in decades. I was no longer a helpless spectator in the destruction of my own life. I had handed the script over to the police, and for the first time, Michael was going to have to improvise without a safety net. I did not witness the events of that afternoon with my own eyes. Instead, I watched the destruction of my son's ego through the grain of a high-definition video file, sitting in the cold silence of a motel room hours later. The footage from my front porch camera offered a front-row seat to the moment Michael realized the Bank of Mom was permanently closed. The timestamp in the corner of the screen read 11:27 in the morning. Michael's black sedan screeched to a halt in front of the driveway. He did not park. He abandoned the vehicle. He jumped out, his face a mask of manic energy. He looked like a man who had already spent the money in his head. He was sweating. His tie loosened, his eyes wide with a mix of terror and anticipation. But Sabrina was not in the car. The passenger door opened, and a man I had never seen before stepped out. He was tall, wearing a leather jacket despite the heat, with a faded tattoo creeping up the side of his neck. He moved with a heavy, predatory slowness. This was the type of man Michael usually blamed for his misfortunes, the boogeyman he used to scare me into writing checks. Now, he had brought the boogeyman to my doorstep. Michael sprinted to the front door and jammed his thumb against the doorbell. He rang it 3 times in rapid succession. When the door did not open, he fumbled for his keys. He shoved his key into the lock and twisted. It did not turn. I had paid the locksmith extra for an emergency call at dawn. Come on. Come on. Open the damn door, Michael shouted at the wood. He stepped back, kicking the base of the door in frustration. That was when he saw it. the brown cardboard box sitting innocently by the welcome mat, with his name scrawled across the top in black marker. A look of relief washed over his face. He clearly thought I had left the cash there to avoid seeing him. He dropped to his knees and tore the packing tape off with his teeth. He ripped the flaps open. His face froze. There were no stacks of $100 bills. There was only paper. Thick, heavy stacks of paper. The man with the tattoo walked up the steps and stood over him. "Is it there?" the man asked, his voice low and bored. Michael pulled out the top stack, the spreadsheet. He stared at it, his eyes scanning the rows of dates and expenses. No, 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 Michael stammered. This is just receipts? Where is the money? The stranger snatched the papers from Michael's trembling hands. He squinted at the bottom line. Total amount given to Michael Price over 10 years. The man read aloud, his voice dripping with amusement. $320,000. Wow. You have been a busy boy. Mikey. She played me. Michael screamed, looking directly into the camera lens, though he was looking for me. She played me. She actually dared to do this to her own son. Mom opened the door. He began throwing the papers onto the porch. The legal declaration from Linda Carver fluttered out next. The stranger picked it up. "It says here she has cut you off," the man said, reading the bold text. "It says her assets are in a trust. It says your debt is your problem. Looks like the free ride is over." Then, the man found the USB drive and the sheet of paper with the red writing. He read the note I had written hours before. Betrayal. Consequences. Justice. Starts here. The man read. He let out a short, sharp laugh and tossed the box down the stairs. "Seems like your mother is smarter than you are. She knew you were hustling her." From across the street, behind the curtains of his living room, my neighbor Harold was recording the scene on his cell phone. He later told me what he heard next, the part my doorbell camera audio did not catch clearly because of the wind. The man grabbed Michael by the collar of his shirt and shoved him against my front door. "If I don't see $45,000 by tonight," the man hissed, "I am going to have a conversation with your other friends. And then I am going to have a conversation with the cops about who exactly has been running this little loan scam. You better fix this." "Mikey!" Michael pushed the man away and turned back to the door. He began to pound on it with both fists, his face contorted in a toddler's rage. "Mum!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. "Mum, you are killing me. Open the door. You can't do this." As he screamed, a black and white police cruiser turned the corner at the end of the block. It did not turn on its sirens. It did not flash its lights. It simply rolled to a stop 50 feet away, silent and observant, just as Detective Miles had promised. They were watching the show, collecting the final pieces of evidence they needed to close the trap. My son was banging on the door of a house that was no longer a home, unaware that the real cage was already closing around him. The next 48 hours did not unfold in a linear narrative. They hit me in a fragmented barrage of emails, voicemails, and screenshots, piecing together the debris of my son's life while I sat in a generic motel room near the airport. The first blow came from Detective Miles. He sent an encrypted email containing a summary of their surveillance. The man who had been on my porch, the one with the neck tattoo, was a known enforcer for a loan shark ring operating out of a back room in a rusted auto body shop. But the report held a darker twist. Michael was not just a victim. The report stated that Michael had been acting as a recruiter, luring his own friends into high-interest loans to cover the interest on his own massive gambling debts. Then came the message from Sabrina. She sent it through my lawyer, Linda, because she was too ashamed to contact me directly. It was a long, rambling block of text that broke my heart. He lied to me. Eleanor, she wrote. He told me that if I didn't help him get the money from you, those men would come for you instead. He said they knew where you lived. He said, Mom is old. She can't handle them. Do you want her blood on your hands? I was only trying to protect you. I put the phone down, my hands trembling. He had weaponized my safety to terrorize his wife, and weaponized her safety to extort me. It was a perfect, vicious circle. The social fallout was faster and less forgiving. By the next afternoon, the whispers in Silveridge had turned into a roar on social media. I watched from a burner account as the facade of Michael's life crumbled in the comments section of his Facebook page. One old college friend posted, "Hey Mike, still waiting on that $2,000 you needed for the emergency surgery last month. Weird how you are ignoring my calls." Another person, a man I recognized as one of his drinking buddies, commented underneath the wife kidnapped script, "Seriously, he tried that on me." 3 weeks ago, I guess he finally ran out of suckers. The local newspaper ran a short story on page 4. Police investigate predatory lending ring involving local residents. Michael's name was not printed, but to anyone who knew how to read between the lines, his silhouette was stamped all over the article. Harold, my neighbor, called me late that evening. His voice was hushed, as if he were afraid Michael could hear him from 3 states away. He came back last night. Eleanor, Harold whispered. Around 2 in the morning. He was drunk. I mean, really drunk. He just sat on your porch steps for an hour. He picked up those papers from the yard, the ones he threw, and he was trying to tape them back together. Did he say anything I asked, gripping the receiver? He kept crying. Harold said. He kept saying, "She can't do this to me. I am her son. She is supposed to fix it." It was pathetic. Eleanor. He looked like a little boy who dropped his ice cream. But the final severing came from Sabrina. She called me 2 days after the incident. She had moved out of their rental and was staying with her sister. "I am done. Eleanor." She sobbed, her voice thick with exhaustion. "I took Leo. I filed for a restraining order this morning. You know, I used to blame you. I used to think you were the problem, that you made him weak by spoiling him. But now I see it. You are just as trapped as I was. We were both just resources to him. I am sorry," was all I could say. "I am so sorry I didn't stop it sooner." Michael, however, did not go quietly, denied my money and abandoned by his wife. He lashed out. He posted a status update that was a masterpiece of narcissism. "When the chips are down, you see who really loves you. Betrayed by my own blood. Abandoned by everyone. God sees all." The comments were brutal. There were no likes. Only laughing emojis and screenshots of his unpaid Venmo requests posted by former friends. Detective Miles called me on the 3rd day. "He is cracking, Mrs. Price," Miles said. "He is scared of the loan sharks, so he is starting to talk to us. But he is still lying about the family fraud. He is trying to paint himself as a pure victim. We need to nail down the extortion charges to force a full plea deal. We need that box. We need the USB drive. You will have it." I said, "I am coming back." I hung up and looked around the beige motel room. I had executed the perfect revenge. I had protected my assets, exposed his lies, and saved his wife. But as I packed my suitcase, I realized that revenge is not sweet. It is sterile and medical. It is like open-heart surgery. It might save the patient's life, but it leaves a scar that never truly fades. I was going home to send my son to prison, and the only thing I felt was a cold, heavy grief. The police station in Silveridge was a building of aggressive, soul-crushing grey. I walked through the metal detector, feeling less like a witness and more like I was marching toward a funeral for someone who was not quite dead yet. Detective Miles met me at the front desk. He did not smile. He simply nodded and led me down a long corridor that smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. This was not a visit. It was a family trial, and I was the executioner. He opened a heavy steel door. Michael was sitting on the other side of a scratched metal table. His hands were cuffed in front of him, resting on the surface. He looked 10 years older than he had when I saw him 2 days ago. His face was covered in patchy stubble. His shirt was wrinkled, and dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes. He looked small. But the moment he saw me, his posture shifted. The fear in his eyes hardened into a familiar, defiant glare, the look of a teenager waiting for his mother to clean up his mess. Detective Miles sat down and placed a digital recorder on the table. He pressed play without a word. The room filled with the sound of the call from 3 a.m. "Mom, if you actually love me, if you care about Sabrina at all, you will do this." The voice on the recording was hysterical, manipulative, and terrifying. The man in the room sat in stony silence, his jaw working tight. "Mrs. Price," Detective Miles said, his voice flat. "Do you recognize the voice on this recording? Can you confirm for the record that this is your son, Michael Price?" Attempting to solicit $45,000 under false pretenses, Michael looked at me. His eyes were wide, pleading. He was begging me with his silence to intervene, to say it was a misunderstanding, to say I had misheard. I bit my lip until I tasted copper. For the first time in his life, I did not jump in front of the bullet. "That is the voice of my son," I said, my voice steady, though my hands were clenched in my lap. "And that is the last time I will ever let him use that voice to rob me." Michael slammed his cuffed hands onto the table, the chain rattling violently. "You set me up," he shouted, spitting the words at me. You knew I was desperate. You wanted this. You wanted to see me in cuffs because you are sick. You are miserable and alone because Dad left you, and you want to drag me down with you. The old Eleanor would have crumbled. The old Eleanor would have apologized for his pain. But I just looked at him, and I felt nothing but a cold, clarifying distance. "I paid off your credit cards in 2015, I said, reciting the list like a grocery bill. "I bought you the car in 2016. I paid your rent for 8 months in 2018. I gave you $20,000 for a business that didn't exist. I have spent $320,000 trying to fill the hole inside you. Michael, this is not the first time. This is the last time. Michael." Detective Miles interrupted, his voice cutting through the tension. "Here is the reality. You are facing felony charges for extortion and fraud. But we know about the loan sharks. We know about the ring. If you plead guilty to the fraud and give us everything on the lending operation names, locations, dates, we can talk to the DA about a reduced sentence. We can put Sabrina and your son in protective custody so those men can't touch them." Miles paused, leaning forward. But there is no deal where your mother pays your debt. That money is gone. You go to prison for a few years, you get clean, and you come out. That is the offer. Michael stared at the detective, then turned his gaze slowly back to me. He was waiting. He was waiting for me to pull out my checkbook and tell the officer that we could settle this civilly. He was waiting for the miracle. I sat like a statue. "Mom," he whispered, his voice trembling. "If you don't help, if I go in there, they have reach. They will kill me." The room went silent. The air was thick enough to choke on. "They only threaten people who still believe money is the only thing that matters," I said softly. "You have a chance to prove them wrong. You have a chance to do the right thing for Sabrina and Leo. But you have to do it alone. I am not paying for your life anymore." Michael slumped back in his chair. The defiance drained out of him, leaving only a terrified man-child. He looked at the table, defeat finally settling over him. Detective Miles stood up and signaled to the guard at the door. As the officer stepped forward to take Michael away, I stood up too. "Connie," I said, using a nickname I hadn't used in decades. He stopped and looked back at me. "You are not the 7-year-old boy lost in the supermarket anymore," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I looked for you 1,000 times back then. I always found you, but I can't find you this time. You have to find your own way back." He didn't answer. The door closed, and the lock clicked. The line between revenge and rescue had blurred into nothingness. But as I stood in the empty room, I knew I had made the only choice left to make. The day of the trial arrived, bringing with it a suffocating humidity that seemed to cling to the walls of the county courthouse. The gallery was fuller than I had expected. There were strangers who had read the headlines, former friends of Michael who had been swindled out of a few $1,000s each, and journalists from the local paper hungry for a domestic tragedy. In the back row, huddled in the shadow of a pillar, sat Sabrina. She was rocking little Leo, who was asleep against her chest. She kept her head down, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. The prosecutor, a sharp-faced man named Mr. Henderson, laid out the case with surgical precision. He painted a picture not of a desperate man in debt, but of a methodical predator. He displayed the timeline of texts and calls where Michael had used the Save My Wife script on 3 different people in 1 month. The victim who lost the most money, however, was listed simply as the mother. The evidence table was piled high with my spreadsheet, the box of promissory notes, and the transcripts of the recordings. Michael's defense attorney, a woman named Ms. Klein, tried to spin a narrative of duress. "Ladies and gentlemen," she argued, gesturing to Michael, who sat slumped in a suit that was now a size too big for him. "My client was living under the constant threat of violence. These loan sharks, they don't ask nicely. He was not stealing from his mother out of malice. He was stealing to survive." It was a compelling story, until the prosecutor projected the bank transfer records. They showed that the money Michael extorted did not go to the loan sharks in North Crest. It went to online casinos and offshore sports betting sites. Then, it was my turn. The room went silent as I walked to the witness stand. I could feel the eyes of the jury on me. I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. When I looked at the defense table, Michael was staring at me. His eyes held a toxic mixture of desperate hope and simmering resentment. He still believed, even now, that I might save him. I recounted my life to the jury, I spoke of the nights I slept on the floor of the laundromat to keep the machines running. I spoke of the pride I felt when I could finally pay for his college tuition. And then I spoke of the slow, eroding transition from being a mother to being a financier. I became a walking ATM, I said, my voice steady but quiet. I thought I was helping him. I thought if I just paid one more bill, he would stand on his own feet. But kindness cannot be an excuse for fraud. I was not helping him live. I was helping him rot. Ms. Klein stood up for cross-examination, her eyes narrowing. She tried to dismantle me. Mrs. Price? She said, her tone dripping with false sympathy. You are 57 years old. You have a history of high blood pressure. Is it possible that the stress of the situation caused you to misunderstand your son's pleas? Perhaps you perceived a threat where there was only a cry for help. It was a low blow. She was trying to paint me as a confused, elderly woman. But the prosecutor was ready. He asked the judge for permission to play a specific audio file from the USB drive I had provided. The courtroom speakers crackled, and then Michael's voice filled the air. It was the recording from the Thanksgiving party 2 years ago. Mum never says no. She feels guilty about leaving Dad. I just have to push that button. And she opens her wallet. It is too easy. Michael squeezed his eyes shut as his own laughter from the recording echoed off the high ceiling. The jury looked at him with undisguised disgust. The confused mother defense evaporated in 10 seconds. Judge Vance, a stern man with silver hair, looked down at me from the bench. The trial was drawing to a close. Mrs. Price, the judge asked, peering over his glasses. Before we proceed to sentencing guidelines, do you wish for the court to consider leniency for the defendant based on the wishes of the family? This was the moment. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. I could feel Michael's gaze burning into the side of my face. I knew what everyone expected. They expected the mother to weep and beg for mercy, to ask for probation, to say that he had suffered enough. I took a deep breath. I looked at the flag standing in the corner. I want the court to do what is right. I said clearly, nothing more, nothing less. Justice is not a gift a mother can bargain for her son. Michael let out a small, strangled sound, like a balloon losing air. The verdict and sentencing were swift. Michael was found guilty of multiple counts of wire fraud and extortion. He was sentenced to 4 years in state prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. The judge also mandated full restitution to the victims and compulsory attendance in a gambling addiction rehabilitation program. As the gavel came down with a final wooden crack, 2 bailiffs moved to take Michael into custody. They pulled him to his standing position. He turned his head to look at me one last time. There was no love in his eyes. There was hate. Yes. And a profound, terrifying despair. He looked like he wanted to scream at me, to curse me for abandoning him. I did not look away. I did not run to the railing to hug him. I did not cry. I simply nodded my head once. It was a small gesture, an acknowledgement of the pain we both felt, but also a confirmation that I would not undo what I had done. I watched my son walk through the side door and disappear into the custody of the state, and I sat alone in the witness box, finally free of the debt I never owed. The night after the trial, I turned the key in the lock of my front door for the first time in weeks. The house smelled stale, like trapped air and old memories. The police had returned the cardboard box earlier that afternoon. It was sitting on the porch, battered and torn. looking like a piece of debris washed up after a hurricane. I picked it up and carried it into the kitchen. I placed the box on the island and began to sort through the wreckage. I tossed the legal documents, the restraining orders, and the damning spreadsheets into the recycling bin. They had served their purpose. I kept only a few things. There was a stack of photographs of Michael as a toddler and a small USB drive. I plugged it in one last time, not to hear the threats, but to find a specific file I had saved years ago, a recording of him at 8 years old, singing a ridiculous, made-up song in the back seat of my car. I put the drive in my pocket. I filled the kettle. In the old days, after a night like this, I would have poured 3 fingers of bourbon to numb the silence. Tonight, I brewed a cup of chamomile tea. I sat at the table and listened. For the first time in 20 years, the house was truly quiet. There was no phantom ringing of the telephone. The invisible time bomb that had hung over my head, the dread of the next crisis, the next gambling debt, the next lie had finally been diffused. I pulled a notepad from the drawer and uncapped my pen. I began to write a letter to Michael. I knew I would not mail it tomorrow. I might not mail it for years. But I needed to say the words that the plexiglass barrier in the interrogation room had prevented me from saying. Dear Michael. I wrote, my hand moving slowly across the paper. I want you to know that I did not abandon you. I only abandoned the role you forced me to play. I realized that every check I wrote was not a lifeline. It was a shovel. And I was helping you dig your own grave. The box on the porch, the police, the trial. That was not just revenge. That was the only way I knew how to stop being your accomplice. I paused, sipping the hot tea. I looked at the empty chair across from me. I am still here. I continued writing. If a day comes when you want to speak to your mother without asking for a single cent, the address has not changed. But until you are ready to be a son again, instead of a debtor, I will remain a ghost to you. I went to the fridge and peeled off a magnetic photo frame. Inside was a picture of Michael at 5 years old, standing on a crate in my very first laundromat. His hands were covered in soap suds, and he was beaming with the pride of helping me fold towels. I slipped the photo into the folds of the letter. It was a reminder of the boy who knew the value of work before the world taught him the shortcut of theft. I took a second sheet of paper. On this one, I did not write a letter. I sketched out a simple, brutal financial plan for a man starting from zero. It detailed how to budget a minimum wage paycheck, how to repair a credit score that had been incinerated, and how to save $10 a week. I added a sticky note to it. If you want it, this is the only thing I'm willing to give you for the next chapter. Knowledge, not money. I placed both envelopes into a small wooden box. I did not seal them. I walked to the pantry, opened the wall safe, and placed the wooden box inside. I spun the dial, locking them away. They would stay there until Michael wrote to me first, and only if his letter did not contain a request for a deposit. I turned off the kitchen light. I walked out onto the front porch and stood in the darkness. The street was quiet. This was the spot where he had screamed. This was the spot where he had kicked the door. Now, it was just a wooden floor under the moonlight. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool night air. Revenge is done, I whispered to the empty yard. And forgiveness, if it comes, starts here. I turned around and went inside, closing the door on the past, finally ready to sleep without fear. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you folks are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Eleanor's decision. Did she go too far? Or was it the only way? If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Grandma's Family Diary channel, smash that like button, and hit the hype button to help this video reach more people. Stay safe out there.